Hello and welcome to The Print. Today I'm joined by Mr. T.R. Raghunandan. You have seen him on The Print many years ago in an interview when he wrote his book, Everything You Wanted to Know About IAS But Were Too Afraid to Ask. And I spoke to you most recently for the story that I did, which went out yesterday on our website, which was to do with the powers of the district magistrate, the powers of the collector, and how in recent years we are seeing that those powers are being expanded quite significantly. And while some officers, some serving district magistrates thought that the trend is reflective of the government and the public's trust in the office of the DM, which has been around for almost 200 years now. You, sir, said that this is, in fact, the biggest remnant of colonial rule that we have in our country, and it is a colonial legacy and nothing else. So we will discuss more about the role of the DM, what the DMs do, why is the position so attractive for young IAS officers, why this position is seen as autocratic by some at the district level. But before that, I'd like to tell our viewers the story about the story that we wrote yesterday. And of course, you should also go and read the story on our website. But the most recent example of the expansion of the DM's powers has been the MHA asking DMs of different districts to give credential reports for suspected illegal migrants across the country, and the district magistrates will have to give a positive credential report within 30 days, failing which the suspected illegal migrant would be deported from India. And a few months ago, we saw also in the Waqf amendments, the district magistrates were given the powers to basically decide whether a certain property is Waqf or not. This decision, remember, was earlier taken by the Waqf board. This was, in fact, one of the most criticized portions of the amendments of the to the Waqf Act. Before that, we have seen several state governments also either amend or pass anti-conversion laws in different states, which have also given the power to the district magistrate to decide whether or not a certain person can convert from one religion to the other. It's also, if you see the Juvenile Justice Act, earlier the approving authority for adoptions used to be district courts, but this power was in 2021 when the act was amended, given to district magistrates. There are a lot of examples. I won't get into all of them, but I do urge you to read the story on the website. Sir, I will now come to you. One of the things that serving district magistrates told me was, or the question they asked me was, what is the problem with the expansion of the powers of the DM? After all, the office of the DM has been around for 200 years. It has been the linchpin of the administrative system of India. So, of course, this office has a lot of institutional memory. So what is the problem if the powers of the DMs are expanded?
Well, that's a typical fallacy that the IAS cultivates. And in fact, the argument itself is a rebuttal of its content. Because on the one hand, we talk about decolonizing the administration. And on the other hand, you have district magistrates waxing eloquent about this institution having been around for 200 years. Yes, it's been around for 200 years. Who brought it in? It was brought in by the British colonialists. And did they have the sense to have district magistrates back at home? No. It's not an institution that existed in Britain, which was imported and given to us for good governance. It was not. It was an exploitative arm of the colonial rule. And the only places where you have district magistrates or similar deputy commissioners or district collectors, as they are known, is in the subcontinent, in India, Pakistan, in Bangladesh, and in the colonially administered areas, imperial, where British imperial rule existed in Africa, in Kenya, Uganda, and so on. So it's very interesting that if this was such a hotshot institution of good governance, why the British did not have it in back there at home? They have their parishes, which are local governments, and they have their counties, and they do not have district magistrates or district collectors. So the argument itself is, on the face of it, quite fallacious.
Tell us a little bit more on, of course, the fact that the office of the DM was put in place by the colonial government, by the imperial government, is fairly well known. And in fact, I think the basic structure of this form of governance was laid out in 1858, which is telling because it was just a year after the 1857 revolt. But can you expand a little bit more on what the British were trying to achieve through this kind of an administrative system at the district level?
See, if you look at imperial rule between 1858, after the mutiny, till around 1882, the administration was fairly ruthless and it did not involve Indians at all. It was a direct belief in the racial superiority of the British, and you had only English men being recruited in England and being positioned here as district collectors, and their essential ethos was a very racist and very separatist kind of mindset. The mindset was that we need to rule over colonial people who are racially inferior to us, and a watchful eye must be kept on them to see that they don't step out of hand. In 1882, the first reforms began in terms of decentralization of administration under Lord Ripon, and that is when district boards were created, and for the first time, elections were held, and Indians got elected to district boards. And the district boards were fairly autonomous. In fact, Lord Ripon had to fight conservative elements within the British government to justify what was a far reaching reform at his time. I mean, I would not say that he was free from racial prejudice, but he was certainly much better than his compatriots at that point in time. He said that we must trust the local people to administer themselves. And district boards, which were created then, did a lot of work. In fact, they did much of the welfare activities. They did recruit teachers. They opened colleges. They conducted a lot of welfare activities at the local level, and the district collector did not have much of a hands-on role in the activities of the district boards. There was a kind of a supervisory role, but otherwise the district magistrates allowed the local Indian elected representatives to take decisions with respect to local welfare. So it is from then onwards the earlier very what should I say, blatant racial superiority which was inflicted upon us through a colonial administration began to get a little diluted, but it did not completely disappear. So right up to independence, the ICS district collectors, the essential ethos was that we must keep a watchful eye on the natives. And sadly, I do believe, and these are very strong words, that after 80 years of administration of freedom, and this is the least changed colonial institution in India. We've gone through economic liberalization, we've gone up socialism, we've gone in for market reforms, but district administration hasn't changed. And that I find absurd, that we should still rule with that ethos. And since I have taught in the Masuri Academy and I interact with a lot of IAS officers, I can tell you, and I've written about this in my book, that this mindset that we are here as enlightened outsiders to keep a watchful eye on the people who are still incompetent to govern themselves, and we young people who have passed exams and who have come from outside are the best deliverers of development, is something that is carefully handed over from one generation of IAS officers to another generation of IAS officers like a family heirloom. And it has got more and more rigid as the years go by. This is a complete delusion. This is a complete delusion, and it is a mockery of democracy that officers who are bureaucrats, who are accountable to the people through elected representatives, should actually harbor this kind of a thought that they are here to actually keep watch on people who cannot govern themselves.
I want to ask you a question about what is the incentive for the elected government to perpetuate this kind of a system? But before that, I also want to ask you something specifically about Nehru, because in his autobiography, he wrote very, very explicitly that no new order can be built in India as long as the spirit of the imperial civil service persists. And he said that, in fact, the ICS and other services must disappear completely. Why do you think, despite having such an unfavorable assessment of the ICS, which later became IAS, was the first prime minister himself unable to get rid of the system? And then my second question, what is the incentive of one government after the other to perpetuate the system?
Well, there's a complete industry out there to denigrate Nehru. So, with the wisdom of hindsight, we can say that Nehru did not do enough. But that's completely wrong. I mean, factually, Nehru probably did a great deal within the limitations under which he was working to actually decentralize or reform the administration. Let me go over it once. You see, the point is that when Nehru took charge as prime minister in 1947, now, what was his priority? Between 1947 to 1950, you were kind of living in a partly independent country with a constitution yet to be drafted. Finally, I would imagine that Nehru's entire, shall I say, domestic policy was looking at the Constituent Assembly and trying to get a constitution set up, which Ambedkar did for us very competently. Finally, in 1950, we had the constitution, and then you can say that on the domestic front, between 50 and 56, apart from the focus on agriculture in the first 5-year plan, Nehru's main concern was how to reorganize the country, and then they came up with linguistic states. It started with Andhra Pradesh being formed in 1953, and then linguistic states being formed in 1956. Many of the states in the south were carved out in 1956. So you can well imagine what Nehru's priorities were. He might have wanted the ICS to disappear, but certainly that was not part of his immediate focus. And the other thing that we must look at is when agriculture was the prime focus of the first 5-year plan, Nehru came up with the community development block plan, where a program where he divided the country into development blocks, and he brought in S.K. Day as the community development minister and put his entire faith in decentralization through S.K. Day. And then when it became clear that mere administrative decentralization or reorganization on the basis of linguistic states and districts, and below the districts, the community blocks is not enough, he came up with the Balwantrai Mehta Committee. And the Balwantrai Mehta Committee, which was headed by the then Chief Minister of Gujarat, came up with the three-level Panchayati Raj system in rural areas. And the first Panchayat Raj system was inaugurated on October 2nd, 1959. And that, I think, was one of Nehru's most far-reaching decisions. In fact, the whole purpose of Panchayati Raj at that level, and particularly at the district level to form the Zilla Parishads, was to begin the process of divesting the district collectors of the development administration and placing it with elected representatives, empowered elected representatives. If at all an IAS officer or an ICS officer had to be placed at the district level, that individual would have had to work under the district panchayat and deliver development outcomes, be accountable to the people of the district. So Nehru started it. Unfortunately, what happened is, in the first flush of enthusiasm from 1959 onwards, elections were held in most of the states to the panchayats. Many of the states, Gujarat, Rajasthan, etc., were pioneers in this. They set up district administrations which were empowered, and they were in the process of actually divesting the district collector of the at least the development functions and placing it with the Zilla Parishads. Unfortunately, after the Chinese debacle, Nehru went into a decline. Domestic policy went into a kind of a rigor mortis, and then he passed away in 1964. So you really cannot blame Nehru for not fully implementing his intent. It would have been too much for him at that stage, at the fragile state of the country as it was at that point in time, to deal with multiple things at the same time: agriculture production, reorganization of states, then implementing Panchayati Raj, and then at the same time to simultaneously take up district administration reform would have been too much, and it would have possibly caused disruption also at that time, because every reform often causes a little disruption as the transition has to be managed. I think the real problem is that after Nehru, of course, you cannot say anything about Lal Bahadur Shastri. He was there around for a very short time. But during Indira Gandhi's time and all the way up to, I would say, the mid 70s, with the Nadir being actually the district, the emergency, there was absolutely no effort made to reform district administration. It continued to be strong, and when Indira Gandhi assumed a dictatorial mode, the district administration became her, instrumentality in curbing human rights, in sending people to jail, in
Can you explain
undertaking
how that
preventive
happened?
detention.
Can you explain how she did that? Because even when we were talking on the phone for the story, you mentioned that Indira Gandhi actually invested a lot in cultivating a relationship directly with the district magistrates, kind of bypassing the state leaderships. So how did she do that, and what was the role of the DMs during the emergency, really?
Exactly, and this is the point. You see, at the end of the day, the ICS ethos was indifferent to democracy. And that ICS ethos has continued undiluted. There might be honorable exceptions among individual IAS officers who have committed themselves to democracy and actually been deeply involved in the development process in a consultative manner. But those are exceptions. By and large, the IAS has a distrust of democracy. They think that democracy is an inconvenience. They believe that they are well equipped, well enlightened, well educated enough to decide what the priorities are for the people who cannot think for themselves. And it was that subterranean and sometimes not even subterranean, sometimes overtly expressed elitist view of the IAS that Indira Gandhi exploited. She knew that they were all careerist people, that they all would fall head over heels in order to please her so as to rise up in the hierarchy quickly. And she also knew that this incipient belief in them was there, that all these hartals and dharnas and society, civil society, and Jayaprakash Narayan asking questions, etc. There was not something that they liked. They liked to wield the lathi along with the SP, and so Indira Gandhi used and exploited that belief that the IAS officers held, which was unchanged from ICS times, to actually crack the whip. And it's much better to deal directly with these people, because at the end of the day, even constitutionally, the IAS is a shared service. The loyalties are divided by definition. And this is something, again, that probably Nehru and Patel were very much aware of, but they did not want to upset the apple cart at that point in time. They gave constitutional protection. In fact, Patel himself was very much votary, even though he himself had been apprehended and punished by the ICS when he was a freedom fighter. But after we got freedom, from a very practical sense, Sardar Patel believed that we should not upset the apple cart at that point in time. And so it was during those 15 years after Nehru passed away that we lost an opportunity for reforms. We could have continued the reforms in Panchayati Raj. We could have brought in a transitional period where the administration was decentralized. But instead, Indira Gandhi concentrated on personality cults, on becoming increasingly undemocratic. And in doing so, she used the IAS and the incentive structure in the IAS, the deep distrust of democracy that generally informs most IAS officers. And she exploited that to the hilt. I mean, you read the Shah Commission reports, and you will know the kind of excesses that IAS officers committed at that time. Anything from putting people into jail, torturing people, or illegal demolitions. Very reminiscent of what is happening today, actually.
It is also, I think, important to acknowledge that the office of the DM is also embedded in the psyche of Indian people. Would you think that is a fallacy, or do you think there is some truth in the fact that a lot of people also do, in some way or the other, look towards the office of the DM as an officer actually told me, and in fact, an officer of the Indian Forest Service said that when you go to a district, वहां पे डीएम ही सरकार है, the DM is equal to government. So how do you sort of demolish or dismantle this at least 2 centuries old understanding of looking to the DM's office for everything that one expects from the state.
I think that yes, there is that. First of all, I agree with you that there is truth in this popular belief that the DM is the uncrowned king of the district, right? But let us unpack that a little bit. If you unpack it a little bit, what you will discover is that kind of thinking exists largely in those states and in those cultures where there was a feudal past, where there has been a more communitarian or welfarist approach towards development. You will not find that ethos so deeply embedded. It might be there, but it's not deeply embedded. I mean, for example, if you're a DM in UP, it's a completely different ballgame the way you are treated. But if you're a DM in Kerala, you are held to account because the Zilla Parishads are strong. The DM does have a coordinating role, but the manner of speaking by the DM, the consultative approach taken by a DM in Kerala, the kind of alpha male bravado that a DM in UP shows, regardless of his or her gender, is not something that you can exercise in Kerala or in Karnataka, for instance. For example, in southern Karnataka, you cannot do that. You cannot do that because the people are quite different and they have different expectations. They do expect that they do believe that the DM is the head of the district administration, but they certainly expect a different kind of consultative behavior on behalf of the DM. So, to make these universal assumptions about the people and the way that they perceive the DM is, I think, a bit of a simplification. But having said that, yes, I think what has happened is also that in the popular media, in Bollywood, in the film media, in stories, etc., positioning the DM as or the SP as this knight in shining armor who rides out to clean government. This has been embedded in the minds of people. I mean, and these are very simplistic, childish kind of assumptions which go well in movies. But when it comes to the hard reality of administration, you can't govern India on the basis of romantic notions of action heroes riding off, to finish off. This is not a dabang kind of a story. Real life is very different.
Yeah. In fact, even in your book, you write, and there's so much said, even sociologically, about the IAS dream in India. I mean, you have lakhs and lakhs of youngsters giving up so many years of their lives hoping to become IAS officers, and you say that the IAS dream is primarily the dream to become a collector. Is that true? And why do you think for young people who have not necessarily tasted that raw power, why do you think the idea of being a collector is so attractive for them?
See, the collector's position, as I said, it has been celebrated, and the mythology around the collector is so deeply embedded because of social media, because of the popular films, and so on and so forth, because of the press, the kind of stories, the simplified stories that the press tells about how development has happened in various districts. It's all about one individual coming and doing something, not a system that performed well. And the other point that we overlook completely is that if all the collectors were such hotshots, and if all the collectors actually did all the things that they speak of in their anecdotes, and with each passing year their anecdotes gets more and more wild and more rosy, then why is India at the bottom of most social indicators worldwide? I mean, if all the collectors had done such wonderful work, then India should have been a paradise, right? It isn't. So, will these people just take accountability for the bad governance of this country for 80 years? We should be ashamed of the fact that some of our development indicators are worse than those you see in Northern Africa. So, what's the big point of saying that the district collector did this or the district collector did that? This is just a self propelled mythology which the Indian public is shorn in this aspect of critical thinking. They lap it up. They lap it up probably because it feeds into their fantasies. about how individuals can come and cause miracles. I suppose the same fantasy drives our political preferences also. But the fact of the matter is that this is driven by a kind of an overwhelming mythology and crowd speak that is initiated from within the administration. Nobody really asks any critical questions.
I mean, I want to get back to a question that I asked you when I spoke when we were talking about Indira Gandhi. Government after government, and when I was doing the story about the present government passing sort of a slew of laws in which the DM has been empowered, you said that it's not this government alone, and uh, its subsequent governments have done that. Again, to ask the question I did just a few minutes ago, what is the incentive really of democratically elected governments to vest so much of power in the office of and in an unelected office, basically?
See, the point is when we talk about democratically elected governments, most people, including you, the presumption when we talk about democratically elected governments is that they comprise of our members of parliament and the members of state legislative assemblies. Right now, we are a country of what 1.4 to 1.5 billion people. We have 700 odd MPs if you include the MPs from the Rajya Sabha, and if you take all the MLAs, they add up to 4,500, right? Or maybe 5,000. So that's it. 5,700 people are the democracy that you have imagined when you speak to me. When you ask me this question, this is the democracy, or these are the democratically elected representatives that you think about, right? What most people don't recognize is that a big revolution could have been possible if we had implemented the 73rd and 74th amendments in letter and spirit. What did the 73rd and 74th amendments do? From a political perspective, it enlarged the space for elected representatives to from 5,700 people to 3.2 million elected representatives. That was the scope and the scale of what was imagined under the 73rd and 74th Amendment. The 74th Amendment said that there would be around, I mean, if you do the numbers, it's about 26 lakh elected representatives at the Gram Panchayat, the Taluk Panchayat, and the Zilla Parishad levels. And if you take all the municipalities and corporations together, another 6 lakh elected representatives. That was the increase in intensity of democratic representation that was envisaged. Now, if that had actually happened, who would have suffered? Those who enjoy the centralization of power. Who are they? The 700 MPs and the 4,500 MLAs. Now, the 4,500 MLAs do not like a well functioning local government to exist. India's political space is crowded and competitive. Now, if in any state the Zilla Parishad, Taluk Panchayat, and Gram Panchayat representatives actually assumed the power that was devolved to them, then the MLAs are nothing. And the MLA should be nothing because the MLA is a member of the Legislative Assembly. His or her job is to just pass the laws. The implementation of these laws, the implementation of welfare programs, which was being done through the district administration, was what was envisaged to be implemented through devolved local governments. Now, 35 years have passed. Have we allowed these governments to function? No, it's gone from bad to worse. In many states, including in my state in Karnataka, we haven't had elections for 4 5 years. And not only that, the courts have failed in their duty to ensure that elections happen because the constitution says that elections shall be held within 5 years. The constitution says that the term of a panchayat or a municipality is 5 years and no more. No more. It envisages that elections are held prior to the completion of the 5 year term of a panchayat. In spite of a Supreme Court judgment that endorses this, a 5 judge constitutional bench that endorses this, high courts and even the Supreme Court itself are looking the other way or are helpless when states with impunity violate this provision and do not conduct elections. So what has happened is, when you talk about democracy, when you speak about democracy, or generally when we speak about democracy amongst the media,
Narrow understanding of what
administration, etc., we only talk about this elite group of 4,500 people who have a huge incentive to see that district magistrates are the implementing agencies and not the panchayats. That is the incentive structure. And the IAS officers who are in the system, in any case, are anti-democratic because they do not want to be accountable. So they would rather answer a chief minister or a prime minister or MLAs rather than hordes of panchayat members.
Hmm.
They don't want to answer. They don't want to have gram sabhas. They do not. They want to do gram sabhas in a paternalistic way, But will they attend a gram sabha and actually be held accountable for failures in their service delivery? No.
When again, when we were talking for the story earlier on the phone, you also mentioned how during the emergency and even otherwise, Indira Gandhi had tried to establish direct contact with district magistrates, and this is something that we see with the current Prime Minister Narendra Modi also.
Yes.
What are the perils of the center or a very strong Prime Minister having a direct relationship with the DM?
It completely makes the entire system arbitrary and unaccountable. It makes administration the function of the whimsy of the higher level government directly with an implementing agency at the lower level. Why do we then call ourselves a federation? What's the whole point of having multiple levels of government? It is to actually apportion responsibility for implementation. That is easy to understand, right? But it is also very important to ensure accountability. The closer the delivery of service is to the person who is a recipient of that service, the easier it is to hold somebody accountable for the failure in service delivery. You cannot hold a prime minister responsible for failure of service delivery because the prime minister is 3 steps removed from the local delivery. But today, what is happening is all politicians want to centralize the credit and decentralize the blame. So if something is not happening, oh, something, it's all because of these panchayats and they delay things. And I mean, I've heard this conversation. I had this conversation so many times with my former colleagues that I can actually hear them say the same things again and again and again. And this is over decades. This is exactly what I heard when I joined service 30, 40 years back. And exactly the same thing I am hearing now. Oh, sir, something, sir, please give us a free hand. Why does anybody want a free hand? Every IAS officer says this, sir, you give me a free hand and I will change the district. No, you're not going to get a free hand because this is a democracy. And the more intense the democracy, the less likely are you to commit mistakes. And it's a pain. Yes, it's a pain, but it is a good pain to have for the country, because if you are able to actually push a good idea as an IAS officer through a bunch of political people who are committed to it, even after you leave, your reform will sustain. Nothing that a collector does, 99.9% of the time, nothing that a collector does sustains for more than 6 months after he or she divests office. And the exceptions actually prove the case. There are outstanding exceptions where some kind of magic happens. It is a vast country, many things, many permutations and combinations can happen. And if people are essentially good at heart, there might be a situation where a district minister, a Zilla Parishad president, and an IAS officer can actually get together, consult with people, undertake a change, create a pride of possession of the local reform by the local people, and things change. I mean, let me give you an example. Indore, the cleaning up of Indore was initiated and catalyzed by an IAS officer.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
the fact of the matter is that the IAS officer concerned was able to actually enthuse people and create a local purchase or a local buy-in to what was his idea.
Hmm.
And now it has created a pride of, possession of the idea, and it has become Indore's idea. Now, Why has that not happened in all the other 65 metropolises or 3,000 cities across India? Because Indore was an exception where the magic happened.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you cannot over celebrate these magical situations,
Yeah.
or try to base your trend analysis on one such situation or five such situations and say, you see, we have transformed the district. IAS officers love to cherry pick when they talk about their successes.
Hmm. So, I mean, you correctly talked about how there's so much mythology built around the office of the DM. So I think it's a good opportunity that we have to sort of demystify this office. If you can if you can tell us, our viewers, about your days as a DM and when you felt perhaps for the first time like, whoa, I have too much power for one person. Like, I can't handle this. Did you have such a moment like that?
No, actually, it's funny, but actually, I did not have this moment. And for that, I have to thank two outstanding politicians, and whom I think are outstanding. The more and more I think about them in retrospect, they were Ramakrishna Hegde and his Rural Development and Panchayati Raj Minister Abdul Nazir Saab. You see,
Hmm.
when I joined the state of Karnataka, within a year of my joining Karnataka, the Congress government lost the elections, and Ramakrishna Hegde came in through a coalition. He was part of the Janata Party, and he brought in a minister called Abdul Nazir Saab as an MLC, a member of the Legislative Council, who had never been elected. And what they did was they implemented not the Balwantrai Mehta committee report, but the Ashok Mehta committee report. The Ashok Mehta committee was constituted by the Morarji Desai government. Sadly, the Ashok Mehta committee's report, which is a very good report, even the dissenting views on the Ashok Mehta committee report written by EMS Nambudripad and MGR are wonderful to read.
I'll put
So
a
they
link. I'll put a link to the report in our in the YouTube description. But also, if you can just tell our viewers a little bit about what the report and its
Yes,
recommendations.
you see, the Balwantrai Mehta committee report was catalyzed by Nehru, and Nehru's idea was, hey, listen, I have brought in SK De, who is now committed to community development. But for the community development process, we cannot do this through an unaccountable, hierarchical, administrative process. We need local participation. So the Balwantrai Mehta committee report actually established elected Zilla Parishads, recommended the establishment of elected Zilla Parishads, elected Taluka Panchayats or at the block level, and Gram Panchayats
Hmm.
elected, and said that they would throw up the elected representatives who would actually be consulted, who would also implement the community development program. So there would be people's participation and a buy in for this decentralized mode of development, focusing essentially on agriculture, nutrition, etc. So that was what Nehru had envisaged, and that is what the Balwantrai Mehta committee report suggested. But actually, strangely enough, though Balwantrai Mehta committee's report is the mother of the 73rd and the 74th Amendment, the report actually did not talk so much about democratic decentralization. It did not talk about the fact that, you know, decentralizing political power itself is an end in itself. They did not speak about that. It was more about political people being elected through a democratic process to facilitate a top driven program. When it came to the to the Ashok Mehta committee report, the report actually spoke about democratic decentralization as being an end in itself,
Hmm.
as something that was good for empowering the people. In terms of its structure, it recommended something slightly different from the three-tier system recommended by Ashok Mehta. It recommended a two-tier system. It said that we can have a very strong district government, and probably they felt that having a block level entity was probably not necessary. You should have something that is in between a block and a gram, because a gram might be so small that administratively you could not scale down the administration to that level. So to give the body some kind of an administrative strength, they suggested some kind of aggregation of villages into an intermediate size, which is smaller than a block but larger than a gram.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, this was not implemented, and the first state in which it was implemented was Karnataka. And this was done by Ramakrishna Hegde and Abdul Nazir Saab. And the law was passed in 1983. That was the year that I joined the government. And it took 4 years for them to get the approval of the President of India uh, for the law. But what the law envisaged was that it would set up a very strong district government. And here came the first and probably the only example of an assault on the district magistrate's position. Till 1987, the district magistrate in Karnataka was just like the district magistrate anywhere else. The district magistrate was Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara, combined powers of administration, of regulation, of elections, protocol, disaster management, and also all the development works.
Yeah.
Now, it's not great to have both regulatory powers and development powers within the same authority, because sometimes you might be contradicting yourself. You might have to punish yourself where you have failed for service delivery, and you are also the regulator to see the quality of service delivery. So Abdul Nazir Saab saw through this, and he said that in Karnataka, when the district Zilla Parishads are set up, an IAS officer senior to the district collector would be posted as chief secretary of the Zilla Parishad and made answerable to the Zilla Parishad's body, and the president of the Zilla Parishad would be given a minister of state rank. Now, these are very important symbolic decisions in a country where we are very hierarchy conscious. The IAS lives and breathes and behaves on the basis of its seniority. I can crack a lot of jokes about that, about how they behave.
I'll come to that. We can crack a few jokes. We can also try and understand why they're so obsessed with hierarchy.
So what happened? So the question that you asked is, how was it in my time? Now, I happen to be one of those few officers who served as a district magistrate in the situation that was envisaged by Ramakrishna Hegde and Abdul Nazir Saab. So, as a junior officer, I was a district collector of Bangalore Rural District, where I exercised all the regulatory powers that were deconcentrated in my hands by the government. So I conducted elections. I was in charge of, I was also in charge of law and order. I looked at disaster management. I looked at protocol and all the regulatory powers, the transport authority, and wherever there were regulatory powers, that was my task. All the 29 development departments, animal husbandry, agriculture, horticulture, fisheries, forests, social welfare, health, nutrition, family planning, all that was taken away from me and given to the Zilla Parishad. 24% of the state's budget was carved out and given to the Zilla Parishad. And the Zilla Parishad CEO, the chief secretary of the Zilla Parishad, was an officer who was 7 years senior to me. So the IAS hierarchy in the district was disrupted from the tradition that existed elsewhere, where the district collector was senior to everybody. Now suddenly the district collector was junior to the chief secretary of the Zilla Parishad. A lot of doomsday predictors amongst the IAS disagreed with this and told Abdul Nazir Saab, this will not work, it will cause disruption. They use the same arguments that you are speaking about. Oh, it's an old institution, people have been used to it, there's a glorious tradition. Abdul Nazir Saab just overruled the whole thing and said, nothing doing, this will be done. Did the heavens fall? Nothing happened. In fact, on the contrary, development spurted. I would say that Karnataka closed the infrastructure gap in decentralized welfare-related infrastructure, such as schools, school buildings, hospital buildings, etc., because all those decisions were being taken by the empowered Zilla Parishads. All the departments were carved into a district sector. So, for example, we were in charge. When I say we, I then became Chief Secretary of a Zilla Parishad in Mr. Devegowda's district, in Hassan district, where I was senior to the district collector. And it was very easy because there were no disasters happening. The district, I would defer to the district collector when the discussion was about elections or when the discussion was about his space. This duality in the administration did not cause a disaster. It actually improved the development outcomes in the district, but it was dismantled after 5 years. Why? The government changed, and the IAS officers were in any case upset with this. And the other category of people who were extremely upset with this were the MLAs, because suddenly the Zilla Parishad president was senior to them in the hierarchy. He was a minister of state. And when the Zilla Parishad president started moving around teachers and doctors and posting them to places where they wouldn't go, MLAs lost their clout in recommending transfers.
And the president of the Zilla Parishad was who was the
The
president?
president of the Zilla Parishad was elected by the Zilla Parishad. They were directly elected from constituencies, and the like an indirect election, just as a chief minister would be selected from amongst the MLAs. Similarly, the Zilla Parishad president was elected by the Zilla Parishad members. So each Zilla Parishad had 40, 50 members or so. So this deconcentrated model worked very well in Karnataka, and in fact, it was used as the model for international change. I remember Dr. L.C. Jain, who was India's first ambassador to South Africa. When South Africa was dismantling their apartheid state, they actually took Karnataka as example. And the interlocutor, the person who took this example there was Dr. L.C. Jain, who was a close confidant of Ramkrishna Hegde and Nazir Saab. But it didn't survive. It didn't survive, and it hasn't. It came back to normal in Karnataka in 1992. And there have been many recommendations in Karnataka saying, let's reverse this. Let's go back to something that we have seen works in practice. But no way. So what is happening is there's this whole lot of development that comes from the top, and it passes through this tiny little chicken's neck, this little kink in the hourglass called a district collector. The district collector today, therefore, is the biggest impediment to development, because everything has to come through the district collector. The second Administrative Reforms Commission actually listed out the number of committees, and it is an incomplete list. They listed out in 2008 or so about 100 odd committees, of which the district collector was the president. And who are these district collectors? Someone with 7 or 8 years of seniority? How long do they stay in the district? A study shows that they stay in the district for 14 months. Okay, at least in colonial times, a district collector, there have been some outstanding people who are district collectors. Sir Thomas Munro was a district collector. Robert Sewell, who wrote the history of Vijayanagara, who translated Italian texts from Italian to, and we learnt about Hampi through Robert Sewell. He was a district judge, and he held a district collector's post 3 times in his career for many years. But here you have somebody who comes in with 8 years seniority and who stays there for 14 years, and this person is going to transform the district. There's just enough time for them to create a mythology and pass on this mythology. But as I said, the MLAs, the higher level governments are very happy with this, because here you find a hatchet man to do your bidding. You pass a law and you get it implemented, overriding all democratic concerns. This is what Indira Gandhi did. This is what is happening now.
I want you to talk a little bit about the IAS officers' obsession with hierarchy, because this is something we all laugh about, we all think is a truism. But if you can unpack that for us, having been an IAS officer, why are these people so obsessed with hierarchies?
Oh, you see, I think it arises from 2 sources. The first is this intense competition. Now, when I don't know what the numbers are, but I think over 1 million people write the preliminary exam, maybe about 10,000 people. So there's a huge sifting out of people, maybe about 10,000 or so write the mains exam. And then maybe around 1,400 or 1,300 people appear for the interview, and about 700 people get selected for the services, of which about 100 or so are in the IAS. 100 to 150 are in the IAS. I believe the numbers have gone up. Now, when you look at the marking, in fact, I read the other day that somebody who made the top 5 or so had 52% or 53% marking. So the fact of the matter is, unlike your college exams where you can be completely inarticulate, you can do rote learning and you will get 98%, but you will not be able to speak a single sentence properly or answer anything outside the syllabus, right? Because our marking system in schools have become absurd, right? The IAS is not like that. The civil services exam is a tough marked system. There are negative marks. Examiners are tough. So everybody is crowded into a very small band of marks, right? So while an IAS topper or the second ranker or the third ranker might have a 20 mark or 30 mark out of 2000 odd marks advantage over the next person, when you come to the 10th or 15th rank onwards, for every single mark, there are 10 to 15 people. So the difference between, let us say, the 20th ranker and the last ranker in the IAS may be 15 marks or 20 marks out of 2000. So hardly a percent, less than a percent, right? When that is the kind of competition that we face, and this is ours is a country that celebrates unhealthy competition. Our parents celebrate unhealthy competition. We are all, this thing is ground into our heads, and it's not that at the end of it we produce exceptionally intelligent people, right? Because I don't think intelligence is a function of how many marks you get anyway. So but this is the system that has been created, and then comes society, which makes such a song and dance about you getting into the IAS. I mean, it used to exist in my time, but at that time there were a couple of magazines, Competition Master, Competition Success Review. Maybe Indian Express would interview you and put a picture of you on the fifth page, right, with a small box. No, it's not like that any longer. I mean, IAS officers are social media influencers now. They post pictures of dancers in the variety entertainment program in Masuri, and it goes viral. There are millions of views. So youngsters have see this as winning a lottery. This is as magical as winning a lottery. One day you are a nobody, and the next day you are a celebrity. And not only that, you are a celebrity within your caste, within your community, within your state. And the marriage market, if you're a man, picks you up and buys you, right? All this, it takes a lot of strength of character to not go overboard and not develop an outsized ego. You got to constantly talk to yourself and say, hey, listen, I need to keep my feet on the ground. I think it's a lot more difficult for a person who enters the IAS today to be level headed as compared to when it was in my time. It was bad in my time. It's far worse now. That's because India loves happy endings. I think we lead such enormously sad lives that we gain a lot of vicarious pleasure when we read the story of a struggling child who then makes it into the IAS, and the next thing is, district collector somewhere. Now, after you get into the IAS, when you go to the Masuri Academy and when you are trained, the Masuri Academy does not prepare you, and that's fair enough. It cannot prepare you for 37 years of service. What does the Masuri Academy prepare you for? It prepares you for those years when you are going to be in the district. During Rajiv Gandhi's time, the training system was vastly improved to have mid-career training for different categories. And I think that was very good because many IAS officers just don't have the technical skills to become technocrats or let us say policymakers at a future date. And because those skill sets are completely different. So the Masuri Academy trains you for becoming a district administrator, and the Masuri Academy is what is high profile and what is aspirational. So if you look at YouTube or if you look at Instagram or social media and generally try to read through what people say after they get into the IAS or in mock interviews or while preparing for the IAS, it's all focused on this, on achieving this miracle. And that is very important. And that is the reason also why the hierarchy is very, very important and celebrated. And this is something of a joke because people outside the IAS don't understand it, but people in the IAS are deadly serious. And the fact that they are deadly serious about the hierarchy makes it even more comical,
Yeah.
right? And it's only a few irreverent people who are often considered to be a kalank on the IAS who can laugh about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to end by asking a quintessentially journalistic question. Uh, do you think the office of the DM needs to go now?
Yeah, I think what we need to do, and I know it's never going to happen, but I think that what we need to do is to start a kind of a redesign of the district administration system from scratch,
Hmm.
right? Now, I might have a bias in suggesting the Abdul Nazir Saab and Ramkrishna Hegde system as a template.
Hmm.
But I would still suggest that that could be a starting point for creating a new system, simply because, in my knowledge, that is the only successful experiment. In fact, that is the only experiment which turned out to be successful, where the position of a district magistrate was downgraded in the teeth of opposition, and a development ethos was created separately from regulation and administered. But why I would say that even that model might need a relook is because at that time we did not have technology.
Hmm.
Today, what is happening is you also have this completely disruptive thing called technology, AI, all of it coming, which might make certain forms of service delivery, certain regulatory forms of service delivery, uh, delivered in the conventional way as we think, irrelevant. I'm not talking about services which are consumed like food or water or so on and so forth, but services like certification, like certain investigations, certain regulations, etc., are things that can be easily disintermediated by technology.
Hmm.
And if that happens, then we have to ask ourselves the uncomfortable question. We don't need either the DM to do it or the panchayat to do it, because technology is going to do it,
Hmm.
right? So we really need to do a restart. But
Hmm.
why I am saying that this is not going to happen is,
Yeah.
A, as of today, we have not only at the center, but even in the states, governments which celebrate muscularity, which celebrate individuals. And this WWF form of governance is what is being fed and sold to the people of India as their savior.
Hmm.
It's all about optics. It's not about the actual nuances of what is going to be done.
Yeah.
So it is very unlikely that people will realize that the root cause is a weak administration at the district level. So there's not going to be any demand from the people. And that begs the question, if there is no demand from the people, if there is no dissatisfaction amongst the people, and they are quite happy with this WWF, sorry, WWE type of governance, then who's going to promote it? Number one.
Hmm.
Number two, the vested interests that want the system to continue, which primarily comprise of MLAs, MPs, and IAS officers themselves, and indeed the entire power elite. Because if you talk to corporate entities, if you talk to banks, if you talk to judges, all of them are fairly ignorant about participative governance. They all distrust democracy. They see democracy as a nuisance. They see themselves as part of this enlightened elite. So they will all back the system where they will have one person to whom they can go.
Hmm.
So even a corporate entity which wants land will say, no, no, Are Baba, I don't want to deal with panchayats. I'd rather deal with the district collector.
Correct.
They never realize that there could be a better system.
Yeah.
So sadly, what I'm going to say will fall on deaf ears. As far as what exactly should be done, I would suggest Nazir Saab's and Ramakrishna Hegde's template. But even the second Administrative Reforms Commission is still worth looking at. It's more than 16 years old now, but that was a good report, and it didn't say enough in my opinion, but it certainly said put the facts down which should make us think.
Yeah. And no, I actually do agree with you that even though reforms and bureaucratic reforms have been a buzzword for a very long time, it's highly unlikely that any of these reforms would actually be implemented in spirit in any way. But thank you so much, Mr. Raghunandan. It's always a pleasure speaking to you, and this conversation has been as insightful as talking to you always is. Thank you so much for joining us.